My GPS died about 20 miles before I reached the facility, which should have been my first clue that this job wasn't going to be normal. But I needed the work, and the pay was ridiculously good for what I thought would be basic prison guard duty in the middle of nowhere, Nevada. The building looked like every other federal facility I'd seen. Concrete walls, razor wire, and security cameras that tracked my beat-up Honda as I pulled into the employee parking lot. I grabbed my paperwork and walked toward the main entrance, trying to look more confident than I felt. Donna Kennedy met me at the security checkpoint. She was probably in her late 40s, with the kind of steady presence that made you feel safer just being around her, but her eyes looked like she'd seen too much of something she couldn't talk about. Drew Adams? She extended her hand with a firm grip. Welcome to Site 19. I'm Sergeant Kennedy, but you can call me Donna. I'll be handling your orientation. I followed her through a maze of hallways that all looked identical. White walls, fluorescent lighting, and the faint smell of industrial disinfectant that couldn't quite mask something else underneath. Something that reminded me of the basement in my childhood home after it flooded. Standard correctional facility, I said, making conversation. How many inmates are we housing? 43 currently. Donna's voice carried a weight that seemed disproportionate to the number. But that's not really the right word for them. Before I could ask what she meant, we entered a small office where she handed me a laminated card with 15 rules printed in neat rows. Memorize these, she said. Your life depends on it. I glanced at the list, expecting the usual bureaucratic nonsense about shift changes and reporting procedures. Instead, I got Rule 1. Always knock 3 times before entering any cell. Wait for response. Rule 2. If lights flicker in Corridor C, evacuate immediately and radio dispatch. Rule 3. Respond to prisoner knocking within 30 seconds. If knocking continues after your response, call for backup immediately. This is... I looked up at Donna, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Are you serious with this stuff? Completely. No trace of humor in her voice. Rule 7 is especially important. Never let the prisoner in cell 12 win any game, no matter what. I kept reading. Rule 9 said, never make eye contact with the occupant of cell 15. Rule 11 forbade engaging with the prisoner in cell 23 under any circumstances. Rule 13 required immediate evacuation if any prisoner asked about my family. Look, I get that security protocols are important, I said, but some of these seem pretty paranoid. What kind of prisoners are we dealing with here that I can't even look at one of them? Donna was quiet for a long moment. The kind that make these rules necessary. You'll understand once you've been here longer. She led me through the rest of orientation. Standard procedures for shift changes, radio protocols, emergency contacts, normal stuff that made the bizarre rules seem even more out of place. But Donna treated everything with the same deadly seriousness, and something in her manner kept me from pushing for more explanations. My first patrol started at midnight. The facility felt different in the darkness, like it was holding its breath. I walked the corridors with my flashlight and radio, checking doors and marking my progress on the clipboard. Most of the cells were quiet, just the occasional sound of someone shifting in their sleep. I was starting to relax, thinking maybe the day shift was where all the weird stuff happened, when 3 sharp knocks echoed from cell 7. I stopped walking. The sound had been distinct, deliberate. 3 measured strikes against the cell door. I checked my watch, 2:17 a.m. Rule 3 flashed in my memory. Respond to prisoner knocking within 30 seconds. I approached the cell and knocked 3 times on the metal door. Everything okay in there? Silence for about 10 seconds. Then 3 more knocks, just as sharp and deliberate as before. Rule 3 continued. If knocking continues after your response, call for backup immediately. I grabbed my radio. Dispatch, this is Adams, requesting backup at cell 7. Prisoner knocking protocol. Copy that, Adams. Duke's en route. Duke Miles showed up 5 minutes later with what looked like a large metal toolbox and an expression that suggested this wasn't his first time dealing with whatever was happening. He was probably in his 50s, built like someone who'd been lifting heavy things his entire life, with gray eyes that missed nothing. "Still knocking?" he asked. Stopped after I called it in. "Good." He set down his toolbox and pulled out a key ring. "Standard protocol. We go in together, you stay behind me, and you do exactly what I tell you when I tell you to do it." The cell door opened with a metallic scrape that seemed too loud in the quiet corridor. Duke shined his flashlight into the darkness, and I saw the prisoner immediately. He was lying on his bunk, perfectly still, facing the wall. Too still. "Sir?" Duke called. "Need you to respond if you can hear me." Nothing. Duke stepped into the cell and I followed, the beam of my flashlight joining his. The prisoner was a thin man, maybe 40, wearing standard orange prison clothes. His eyes were open, but they weren't looking at anything. Duke reached out and touched the man's neck, then pulled his hand back quickly. "He's dead," Duke said matter-of-factly. "Has been for hours." I stared at the body. The skin looked normal. No signs of decomposition or rigor mortis. He could have been sleeping except for those empty, staring eyes. "But he was knocking," I said. "We both heard it." "Yeah." Duke opened his toolbox and pulled out what looked like a metal box with several latches. That wasn't him. As if responding to Duke's words, something moved in the corner of the cell. Not the body. Something else. A writhing shadow that seemed to exist just outside the edges of our flashlight beams. When I tried to look directly at it, my eyes couldn't quite focus, like trying to stare at something underwater. "There you are," Duke muttered, opening his metal box. Inside was what looked like a modified vacuum cleaner attachment connected to some kind of containment unit. "Adams, step back toward the door. Don't run. Don't make sudden movements." The shadow thing grew larger, more defined, and for just a second I could swear I saw the outline of a person, the same build as the dead prisoner, the same height. It moved toward the wall where we'd heard the knocking, and I realized it was mimicking the motions of knocking against metal. Duke activated his device with a low, humming sound, and the shadow was suddenly pulled toward the containment unit like smoke into a fan. It writhed and twisted, fighting against the suction. But within 30 seconds, it was gone, sealed inside Duke's metal box. "What the hell was that?" I asked, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. "Mimic entity," Duke said, closing his toolbox like this was the most normal thing in the world. "They attach to recently deceased and copy their basic behaviors. Dead guy probably knocked on his door every night before bed, so the entity kept doing it." I looked back at the body on the bunk. "How long has he been dead?" "Probably since yesterday afternoon. We'll get the medical examiner in here, but I'm guessing natural causes. Heart attack, stroke, something like that." Duke headed toward the door. The entity would have kept knocking until someone responded. Could have gone on for days. We stepped back into the corridor and Duke locked the cell door. I was still trying to process what I'd just seen, but one thing was becoming very clear. "The rules," I said. "They're not security theater." "Nope." Duke picked up his toolbox. "They're survival instructions. Follow them exactly every time and you might live long enough to collect your pension." He walked away down the corridor, leaving me standing outside cell 7 with the sudden understanding that I wasn't working at a prison at all. I was working at something else entirely. Something that required rules about knocking protocols and shadow creatures and never looking certain prisoners in the eye. I pulled out the laminated card Donna had given me and read through the 15 rules again, this time understanding that every single one had been written in someone else's blood. 2 hours later, I was still replaying the mimic incident in my head when Donna found me in the break room, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. "Ready for the maximum security wing?" she asked, like we were heading to a movie instead of whatever fresh nightmare awaited me there. I looked up from my untouched coffee. "Is that where the really dangerous ones are?" "They're all dangerous, Drew. That's why they're here." Donna waited while I grabbed my flashlight and radio. But max security houses the ones who require more specialized protocols. We walked through a section of the facility I hadn't seen during orientation. The walls were thicker here, the doors heavier, and each cell had an additional viewing slot covered by a metal panel. The lighting was different too, brighter, like they wanted to eliminate every shadow. Cell 12, Donna said, stopping in front of a door that looked identical to all the others. I want you to meet Wren Shelton. She slid open the viewing panel and I peered through the reinforced glass. The prisoner inside looked completely normal, thin, pale, probably in their 30s, sitting cross-legged on their bunk reading a paperback book. They glanced up when the panel opened, and their pale blue eyes met mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Good evening, Sergeant Kennedy," Wren said, their voice carrying clearly through the intercom. "And you must be the new guard. Drew, isn't it?" I looked at Donna, who nodded for me to respond. "Yes, Drew Adams." How delightful. Wren closed their book and stood with fluid movements that seemed too controlled, like they were consciously thinking about each motion. "I don't suppose you play chess, Drew?" Before I could answer, Donna stepped closer to the intercom. "Standard recreation period, Wren. Same rules as always." "Of course." Wren smiled, and something about it made me want to step back from the door. "I do so enjoy a good game." Donna unlocked the cell door with a key from a different ring than the one Duke had used. Inside, the space was larger than the regular cells, with a small table and 2 chairs bolted to the floor. A chess set sat on the table, the pieces arranged in starting position. Wren gestured toward the chair across from them. "Please sit. It's been 3 days since my last opponent." I glanced at Donna, who positioned herself near the door with her hand resting on her radio. 30 minutes, she said. Standard supervision. As I sat down, Rule 7 blazed in my memory. Never let the prisoner in cell 12 win any game, no matter what. I'd thought it was weird when I first read it, but after the mimic incident, I was taking every rule as literal life or death instruction. Wren moved a pawn forward 2 squares. "So tell me, Drew, what brings you to our little desert paradise?" I moved my own pawn, trying to remember the basic chess strategies my dad had taught me years ago. "Just needed work. Just needed work," Wren repeated, advancing another pawn. How wonderfully honest. Most guards make up elaborate stories about wanting to serve justice or protect society. They tilted their head, studying my face. "You know what I find fascinating about the desert?" I moved my knight, already feeling outmatched. Wren played like someone who'd had a lot of practice. "What's that?" "How it preserves things." Wren captured my pawn with their bishop. "Bones, especially. The dry air, the heat. It mummifies tissue beautifully." "Your turn." My hand hesitated over my pieces. There was something in the way they said it, like they were speaking from experience. I moved my other knight, and Wren immediately responded by advancing their queen. "Check," they said pleasantly. I studied the board, panic starting to build in my chest. Wren had backed me into a corner in just 5 moves, and I could see at least 3 different ways they could finish me off in the next few turns. Rule 7 repeated in my head like a mantra. Never let them win. "The previous guard who sat in that chair," Wren continued, apparently unbothered by my silence, "thought he was quite clever. Marcus, I think his name was. He lasted almost 20 minutes before I had him in checkmate." I moved my king, buying myself maybe 1 turn. Wren's smile widened. Marcus had such interesting fingers. Long, graceful. Pianist's hands, really. I wonder if he still plays. Wren moved their queen again. Check. My mouth went dry. I could see the endgame now, and there was no legitimate way out. Wren had orchestrated this entire match from the opening move, driving me toward inevitable defeat. But Rule 7 wasn't a suggestion. It was a survival instruction, and I'd learned what happened when you ignored those. I did something my dad would have been ashamed of. I deliberately moved my rook to a position where Wren could capture it, sacrificing a major piece to create an opening. Then, while they were taking it, I quickly moved my remaining pieces into an aggressive formation that hadn't been there a second before. Interesting, Wren murmured, their pale eyes narrowing. Most unexpected. I pressed my advantage, using every dirty trick I could remember from childhood games with my cousins. Wren's expression grew colder with each move, their casual demeanor fading as they realized I was somehow turning the tide. "Checkmate," I said finally, my voice barely steady. Wren stared at the board for a long moment, their hands perfectly still on the table. When they looked up, their smile was arctic. "Well played, Drew." They leaned back in their chair, and I noticed their fingers were long and graceful, just like they'd described Marcus's. I do so enjoy breaking the fingers of guards who beat me at games, one joint at a time, usually. The sound is quite distinctive. I shot a glance at Donna, who was already moving toward the table. "Time's up," she announced. "Back to your bunk, Wren." Wren stood slowly, their movements fluid and predatory. "Until next time, Drew. I'm already looking forward to our rematch." Donna hustled me out of the cell and locked it behind us. My hands were shaking as we walked back down the corridor, and I could feel Wren's pale eyes watching us through the viewing slot. "3 guards," Donna said quietly once we were out of earshot. "That's how many Wren killed before we implemented the rules. Marcus was the last one. I stopped walking. Killed how? Broke their necks after torturing them." Donna's voice was matter-of-fact, but her jaw was tight. "The games aren't recreation, Drew. They're tests. Wren needs to know if you'll follow the protocols that keep everyone alive." I thought about Wren's casual mention of Marcus's fingers, the way they'd smiled when talking about breaking bones. What happens if someone lets them win? They get to find out what Wren considers proper payment for victory. Donna resumed walking. "The rules exist because people like Wren have been contained here for years, and we've learned what triggers their violent impulses." My stomach felt like it was trying to crawl up my throat. How was I supposed to win legitimately? They had me in checkmate. "You weren't supposed to win legitimately." Donna stopped at the security door leading back to the main corridor. "You were supposed to follow Rule 7, no matter what it took. The fact that you were willing to cheat to save your life tells me you might actually survive this job." As we passed back through the security checkpoint, I realized I was nauseous. Not just from stress, but from the understanding that I'd just been seconds away from serious harm. And the only thing that saved me was my willingness to break every rule of fair play my parents had ever taught me. The laminated card felt heavier in my pocket, each rule weighted with blood and hard-earned knowledge. I was starting to understand that working here didn't just require following protocols. It required becoming the kind of person who could sacrifice their principles to stay alive. And the worst part was, I was pretty sure I could live with that. The alarm went off at 7 a.m., and I dragged myself out of bed feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My brain kept cycling through everything from the night before. The mimic entity, Wren's pale eyes, the way Donna had talked about broken necks like she was discussing the weather. I grabbed the laminated rule card from my nightstand and read through it again while my coffee brewed. Rule 11 stood out this time. Never engage with the prisoner in cell 23 under any circumstances. I wondered what made that particular prisoner different from the chess-playing psychopath in cell 12 or whatever nightmare was behind the door in cell 15. The morning shift felt surreal after everything that had happened. Delivering breakfast trays to supernatural entities felt like the setup to a joke that nobody was laughing at. Most of the cells were quiet, just the normal sounds of people eating and moving around. But I found myself checking my watch every few minutes, counting down the seconds when I had to respond to knocking, watching for flickering lights in Corridor C, I was wheeling the empty breakfast cart back to the kitchen when I spotted someone in a charcoal gray suit reviewing security footage on a monitor near the main desk. The man was older, maybe late 50s, with the kind of authority that made everyone else in the room defer to him automatically. "You must be Adams," he said without looking away from the screen. His voice carried a slight Irish accent. "Finn Church, warden of this facility." I set down the clipboard I'd been carrying. "Yes, sir. Good morning. Quite a first night you had." Finn paused the footage and turned to face me. His green eyes were sharp but not unkind. "Duke tells me you handled the situation in Cell 7 appropriately." "I just followed the rules." "Exactly." Finn smiled slightly, like I'd said something that pleased him. "The individuals we house here require very specific protocols. They're considered too dangerous for conventional correctional facilities." I wanted to ask what made them dangerous, but something in Finn's manner suggested he wouldn't be more specific than that. At least, not yet. "Duke mentioned you might have questions about the nature of our work here," Finn continued. "I want you to know that everything we do serves a vital purpose. The rules exist because we've learned what happens when they're ignored." "How long have you been running this place?" 12 years. Finn turned back to the security footage, advancing frame by frame through what looked like empty corridor shots. "Long enough to understand that some knowledge comes with a price. Take your time adjusting, but remember that following protocols isn't just about your safety, it's about everyone's." He dismissed me with a nod, and I spent the rest of the morning helping with routine maintenance and inventory. Normal work that almost made me forget where I was until I passed cells and heard the occasional sound of movement from inside. By afternoon, I was feeling more confident. 2 shifts down, and I was starting to understand the rhythm of the place. The rules were weird, sure, but they worked. Follow them exactly, stay alert, and everyone goes home safe. I was doing my afternoon rounds when I passed cell 23. "Hey, guard!" The voice came from inside the cell, urgent but not quite desperate. "I need to speak with someone in charge. This is important." I kept walking. Rule 11 was crystal clear. Never engage with the prisoner in cell 23 under any circumstances. But the voice followed me. "My name is Mateo Davidson. I'm a CIA operative, and I've been wrongfully imprisoned here. I have information about classified operations that..." I stopped despite myself. Something about the way he spoke, the specific terminology he used, made me turn back toward the cell door. The man's voice carried the kind of authority that came from being used to having orders followed. "I can't talk to you," I said, immediately regretting that I'd responded at all. "Listen, I understand you have protocols, but this is bigger than whatever briefing they gave you." The voice was calm, professional. "I was on assignment investigating supernatural phenomena for the agency when something went wrong. They classified me as compromised and dumped me here, but I'm still fully human. I should have walked away." Rule 11 wasn't a suggestion, and I'd learned that the hard way. But something made me step closer to the door. I was investigating a facility in Romania that was conducting experiments with otherworldly entities, Mateo continued. The operation was called Threshold, run by a black site team under congressional oversight. I can give you classification numbers, budget allocations, personnel files. The details sounded real. Too real to be something a prisoner would just make up. "What's your badge number?" I asked before I could stop myself. 3847-291. My handler was Deputy Director Patricia Morse, Counterintelligence Division. I've been with the agency for 15 years, specializing in anomalous phenomena investigation. My mouth went dry. This wasn't the rambling of someone who'd lost touch with reality. Every detail was crisp, specific, the kind of information that would be easy to verify if anyone cared to check. "Look, I know this sounds crazy, but they brought me here because I was exposed to something during the Romania operation. Some kind of interdimensional influence that they claim compromised my mental state." Mateo's voice dropped lower. "But I'm still me. I'm still human." And I know things about this facility that you need to understand. What kind of things? Like the fact that you grew up in Bend, Oregon, that your mother died when you were 12, and your father raised you alone after that. Mateo paused, and I could hear him moving closer to the door. Like the fact that your real name isn't Drew Adams, it's Drew Jan Adams, and you stopped using the Korean part of your name after kids at school made fun of it. Ice shot through my veins. I'd never told anyone here about my mother or about dropping part of my name. That information wasn't in any file I'd filled out for this job. How do you know that? Because I still have access to classified databases and I ran a background check on every new hire at this facility. Your psychological profile is exactly what they look for. Rule followers who don't ask too many questions. His voice carried a note of sympathy now. Drew, they didn't hire you despite your tendency to follow authority. They hired you because of it. My hands were shaking. You're lying. Your father lives at 847 Pine Street, apartment 3B. He works at the lumber mill and hasn't remarried because he still wears your mother's wedding ring on a chain around his neck. Mateo's voice was gentle now, almost paternal. He worries about you constantly but doesn't know how to say it. The last time you talked, he asked if you were eating enough vegetables. I stepped back from the door like it had burned me. There was no way a prisoner could know those details. No database contained information about my father's wedding ring or our awkward phone conversations. I know this is frightening, Mateo continued, but you need to understand what's really happening here. This isn't a prison, Drew. It's a cover-up, and the things they're keeping here, some of them used to be people just like you and me. I turned and walked away as fast as I could without running, my heart hammering against my ribs. Behind me, Mateo's voice followed down the corridor. They're going to tell you I'm dangerous, that talking to me violates security protocols. But ask yourself why they won't let you verify my story. Ask yourself why they recruited someone with your exact psychological profile. I found Donna in the main office, reviewing duty rosters. When she looked up and saw my face, her expression immediately shifted to alert concern. What happened? Cell 23, I said, my voice shaky. The prisoner, Mateo Davidson. He knew things about my family, things he couldn't possibly know. Donna went pale. She grabbed her radio without hesitation. Control, this is Kennedy. I need Warden Church in the main office immediately. Code yellow for Cell 23. Within 2 minutes, Finn appeared with 3 guards I hadn't seen before, all carrying equipment that looked more like military gear than standard prison restraints. Their faces were grim, professional, like they'd done this before. How much did you engage? Finn asked me directly. Maybe 2 minutes. He said he was CIA, gave me badge numbers and details about classified operations. Then he started talking about my family. Finn's jaw tightened. Prep the extraction team, he told the guards. Full restraint protocol. Wait, I said. What if he's telling the truth? What if he really is CIA? Finn looked at me with something that might have been pity. Drew, the man in Cell 23, has been here for 3 years. Whatever he was before he arrived, he's not that anymore. The specialized team moved down the corridor with the efficiency of people who'd done this exact procedure many times. I watched through the security monitors as they opened Cell 23 with keys that looked different from the standard ones, entering with what appeared to be some kind of restraint system connected to electrical components. The struggle was brief, but violent. Through the grainy footage, I could see Mateo fighting against the restraints with strength that seemed impossible for someone who'd been imprisoned for 3 years. It took all 3 guards to subdue him, and even then he was screaming something about cover-ups and congressional oversight. As they dragged him from the cell toward what Donna quietly told me was the isolation wing, Mateo twisted around and looked directly at the security camera. "Drew!" he screamed, his voice carrying clearly through the monitor speakers. "Remember what I told you about your mother. Ask them how she really died. Ask them why they recruited you." Then he was gone, hauled away by guards who moved like they were containing something far more dangerous than a man in an orange jumpsuit. The silence in the main office was deafening. Finn turned off the monitor and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. The man in cell 23 has been classified as a Category 4 entity with advanced psychological manipulation capabilities, he said quietly. Everything he told you was designed to establish trust and create doubt about our operation here. But the details about my family are exactly the kind of information these entities can extract and use against us. Finn's voice was firm but not unkind. Rule 11 exists because this particular prisoner has broken the minds of 4 guards over the past 3 years. Each one thought they were special, that he was sharing unique information with them. My legs felt weak. I sank into the nearest chair, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. What happened to the other guards? Donna and Finn exchanged a look that made my stomach clench. 2 committed suicide, Donna said quietly. 1 disappeared entirely. The 4th... She paused. The 4th had to be transferred to a different kind of facility. What kind of facility? The kind where they treat guards who've been psychologically compromised by exposure to entities like the one in cell 23, Finn said. The kind of place where people go when they can no longer distinguish between reality and the lies these things tell them. I stared at the blank security monitor, thinking about Mateo's voice, the way he'd spoken about my mother, the genuine concern in his tone when he'd described my father. How do I know you're telling me the truth? I asked. Finn was quiet for a long moment. Because if we were lying, Drew, you'd already be restrained in the back of a transport vehicle heading for the same facility as the guard who came before you. The weight of that statement settled on me like a lead blanket. I looked at the laminated card in my hands, Rule 11, staring back at me with new significance. The rules aren't just about staying alive, I said slowly. No, Finn agreed. They're about staying human. I was coming out of the equipment storage room around 6 p.m. when I saw Duke heading towards cell 15 with his toolbox. Nothing unusual about that. Guards did maintenance checks all the time. I gave him a quick nod and kept walking toward the exit, ready to clock out and try to process everything that had happened with Mateo. 5 minutes later, I was unlocking my car in the parking lot when I heard boots on gravel behind me. Heading out, Adams? Duke's voice carried that familiar, gruff tone. I turned around, keys in my hand. Yeah, finally done for the day. Saw you going into cell 15 a few minutes ago. Everything okay in there? Duke stopped walking. His gray eyes narrowed, and he tilted his head like he hadn't heard me correctly. Come again? Cell 15. You had your toolbox. Looked like you were doing maintenance or something. I've been in the break room for the last hour writing incident reports. Duke pulled out his radio without taking his eyes off me. Control, this is Miles. Requesting confirmation of my location for the past 60 minutes. The radio crackled. Miles, you've been logged in the break room since 5:15 p.m. Is there a problem? My stomach dropped. Duke was standing right in front of me, but I'd definitely seen him walking into cell 15. Same height, same build, same gray hair and weathered face. Even the same worn toolbox he always carried. Drew, Duke said quietly, I need you to think very carefully. What exactly did you see? You. I mean, someone who looked exactly like you, walking into cell 15 with a toolbox. My voice sounded thin in the desert evening air. But you're here, so that's obviously impossible. Duke was already moving back toward the building, talking into his radio. Control, we have a potential code red situation. I need backup at cell 15 immediately, and get me eyes on the security monitors for corridor D. I followed him back inside, my keys still clutched in my hand like some kind of talisman. The main corridor felt different now, charged with the same tension I'd felt during the mimic incident. Duke moved with purpose, checking his equipment as he walked. What's code red mean? I asked. Means something is seriously wrong and we need to figure out what before people start dying. Duke paused at the security station and gestured for me to look at the monitor showing Cell 15's corridor. "Tell me what you see." On the grainy black and white screen, I could see a figure that looked exactly like Duke standing outside Cell 15. The person, thing, whatever it was, held the same toolbox and wore an identical uniform. But something was off about the way it moved, like someone trying to walk normally but having to think about each step. "That's not you," I said. "No, it's not." Duke radioed for additional backup, his voice steady but urgent. "Control, we need the specialized response team in Warden Church immediately." On the monitor, the fake Duke opened Cell 15 and stepped inside. Through the security camera, I could see it moving around the cell with deliberate precision, examining the walls, the bed, even checking under the mattress like it was cataloging everything. "What's it looking for?" "Information," Duke said grimly. "These things are smart. They study us, learn our routines, figure out our weaknesses." The fake Duke emerged from Cell 15 and moved to the next cell, repeating the same careful examination. It pulled out a small notebook, identical to the one Duke always carried, and appeared to be taking notes on what it found. "How long has it been doing this?" I asked. "Long enough to get a detailed look at our security procedures." Duke's jaw was tight as he watched his doppelganger systematically work its way down the corridor, and long enough to figure out which prisoners might be useful to it. More guards arrived, including the same specialized team that had handled Mateo. They moved with the same efficiency, carrying equipment I was starting to recognize as standard protocol for supernatural threats. But as they approached Cell 15, the fake Duke on the monitor stopped what it was doing. It looked directly at the security camera. The smile it gave the lens was perfectly Duke's smile, but there was something behind the eyes that made my skin crawl. Then, while we watched, it walked straight through the solid concrete wall of the cell and disappeared. "Control room, did you get that?" Duke called into his radio. "Confirmed. Entity has vacated the area through non-standard means." The corridor was empty now, but the real Duke was still staring at the monitor like the fake version might reappear at any moment. "Bag everything in that cell," he told the response team. "Full contamination protocol." Finn appeared next to us so quietly I didn't notice until he spoke. "How long was it active?" "At least 20 minutes, Duke reported. "Drew here spotted it around 6 p.m. Finn looked at me with those sharp green eyes. "You're certain it was an exact duplicate?" "I thought it was Duke until I saw the real Duke in the parking lot." My voice was steadier than I felt. Same face, same uniform, same everything. But the way it moved was wrong. "They're getting better at mimicking human behavior," Finn said, almost to himself. "That's concerning." He led us to his office, closing the door behind us. The room was Spartan. Desk, filing cabinets, a few photographs of what looked like the facility under construction. Finn poured himself coffee from a machine in the corner, but didn't offer us any. "What you witnessed tonight was a shape-shifting entity, probably one that escaped from another dimensional space about 6 months ago." Finn sat behind his desk, his expression serious. "They can perfectly duplicate human appearance, but they don't fully understand human behavior patterns. That's usually how we catch them." "Where did it come from?" I asked. "The same place most of our prisoners originated." Finn opened a file drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "Drew, what I'm about to tell you is classified at levels that most government officials don't have clearance for." He opened the folder and spread several photographs across his desk. The images showed what looked like scientific equipment from decades ago. Machines with vacuum tubes and analog dials, all surrounding what appeared to be empty space that somehow bent light around it. In 1962, the government was conducting experiments with interdimensional physics at a facility in New Mexico. The goal was to create portal technology for military applications. Finn pointed to one of the photos. They succeeded beyond their wildest expectations, and that success nearly destroyed civilization. The photos showed the same equipment, but now the empty space was filled with something that hurt to look at directly. writhing darkness that seemed to move independently of the light around it. The portal opened into spaces that weren't meant to intersect with our reality. Things came through that had never been human, never been bound by the physical laws that govern our world. Finn's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was describing a failed business venture. Others were humans who got too close to the portal and were changed. I thought about Ren's pale eyes, Mateo's impossible knowledge, the mimic that had worn a dead man's appearance. All the prisoners here came from that experiment? Some came through the portal. Others were created by subsequent experiments as the government tried to understand what they'd unleashed. Finn gathered the photographs and returned them to the folder. This facility was built to contain them, away from civilian populations where they could cause mass casualties. What about the thing that looked like Duke? Shapeshifters are among the most dangerous because they can infiltrate human society. The one you saw tonight was probably gathering intelligence on our security procedures, looking for weaknesses it could exploit later. Finn's green eyes fixed on me. The fact that you recognized it as an imposter immediately tells me our recruitment process was correct. What do you mean? We don't hire guards randomly, Drew. We specifically recruit people with psychological profiles that make them effective at this job. Finn opened another file. This one had my name on the tab. People who can follow rules without questioning them, who notice details that others miss, who can function in high-stress environments without breaking down. I stared at my file, thick with papers I'd never seen before. You've been watching me before I applied. For 6 months, your responses to authority, your attention to detail, your ability to compartmentalize disturbing information, all of it made you an ideal candidate. Finn's expression wasn't apologetic. We need people who can do this job without losing their minds to existential terror. What happens to the people who can't handle it? Finn was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the facility's air conditioning humming in the background. Some quit and never speak of what they've seen. Some break protocols and die. And some, he paused, some become hosts. Hosts for what? For the entities they're meant to guard. Finn closed my file and leaned back in his chair. The shapeshifters, the mind readers, the things that feed on human consciousness, they all need human hosts to fully integrate into our reality. Guards who break protocols, who let their guard down, who start to sympathize with the prisoners, they become vehicles for these entities to escape. The room felt cold, despite the desert heat outside. I thought about all the rules I'd memorized, all the warnings about eye contact in conversations and games. Finn stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where I'd encountered Duke just an hour ago. Every protocol exists because we learned what happens when it's violated. Every restriction is written in blood. I sat in the chair across from his desk, processing the weight of what he'd just revealed. You're telling me this facility is all that stands between these things and the general population? One of several, but yes. Finn turned back to face me. The question is whether you can live with that knowledge, Drew. Whether you can continue doing this job knowing what's really at stake. I looked at the laminated rule card in my pocket, thinking about the mimic entity. Ren's predatory smile, Mateo's psychological manipulation, and now a shapeshifter that could wear anyone's face. What if I can't? Then you'll be transferred to a facility where you can receive treatment for the psychological trauma, and someone else will take your place. Finn's voice was gentle but firm. But I don't think that's what you'll choose. Why not? Because you've already proven you can follow the rules when it matters. You didn't let Ren win at chess. You walked away from Mateo when he tried to manipulate you. You spotted the imposter Duke when other guards might have missed it. Finn returned to his desk. You're already protecting humanity, Drew. The only question is whether you'll do it consciously. I thought about my father in Oregon, going about his daily life without knowing that things like this existed. I thought about everyone I'd ever cared about, living in ignorance of the supernatural threats that surrounded them. How many facilities like this are there? Enough. Finn smiled slightly, the first genuine warmth I'd seen from him. But not nearly enough. I stood up, feeling the weight of the decision settling on my shoulders. Outside, the desert night was full of ordinary dangers: heat, wildlife, the kind of isolation that could kill unprepared travelers. But inside this building, we kept watch over things that could unravel reality itself. "I'll stay," I said. Finn nodded like he'd expected that answer. "Then welcome to the real job, Drew. Everything up until now has been training." As I walked back to the parking lot, I realized I wasn't the same person who'd arrived 3 days ago looking for steady employment. I was something else now, a guardian of secrets too dangerous to share, a keeper of rules written in human suffering. And the strangest part was, I was okay with that. I spent the day trying to act normal while my brain kept cycling through everything I'd learned. Regular duties felt surreal: checking locks, delivering meals, updating logs. When I knew I was guarding interdimensional entities and shapeshifters, every routine task carried new weight now that I understood what the facility really contained. By evening rounds, I'd almost convinced myself I could handle this. The rules made sense. The procedures worked. I could do this job and sleep at night, knowing I was protecting people. That confidence lasted until I found Donna in the archives at 11 p.m. The archives were supposed to be empty during night shifts. I'd only gone down there because one of the security lights was flickering, probably nothing. But after the shapeshifter incident, I wasn't taking chances with anything unusual. The basement storage room was lined with filing cabinets and boxes stretching back decades. Industrial lighting cast harsh shadows between the rows, and the air smelled like old paper and dust. I was checking the light fixture when I heard the soft sound of pages turning. Donna sat at a metal table in the back corner, surrounded by open files and manila folders. A small digital camera lay next to her, and she was methodically photographing document after document. When she saw me, she didn't look surprised or guilty, just tired. "Drew." She set down the paper she'd been holding. "I was wondering when someone would find me. What are you doing?" "My job." She gestured at the files spread across the table. "The real one I came here to do." I moved closer and saw the documents she'd been photographing. Incident reports dating back to 1962. Scientific research papers with classifications I'd never seen before. Personnel files on guards who died or disappeared. And photographs, dozens of them showing experiments, containment failures, and things that looked human but weren't quite right. "You're copying classified information. I'm documenting crimes against humanity." Donna picked up another file, this one labeled Portal Activation Protocols, Project Threshold. "Drew, do you know how many people have died because of this facility? How many families never learned what happened to their loved ones who worked here?" My stomach tightened. Finn told me the experiments were necessary, that they prevented something worse. Finn told you what he needed to tell you to keep you compliant. Donna opened the file and showed me a typed report. This is from 1963, 1 year after the first portal activation. 17 researchers were transformed into entities during a containment breach. The government classified them as casualties and told their families they died in an industrial accident. The names on the report meant nothing to me, but the clinical language describing their transformation made my skin crawl. Subject underwent complete cellular restructuring following exposure to extra-dimensional energy. Consciousness appears intact, but behavioral patterns indicate substantial psychological modification. "They became prisoners here," I said. "Some of them are still here." Donna pulled out another file with photographs paper-clipped to the reports. Cell 7, Cell 15, Cell 23. Those aren't just random entities, Drew. They're people who were unlucky enough to work for the wrong government project 60 years ago. I stared at a photograph of a young man in a lab coat smiling at the camera. The name underneath read Dr. Michael Carver, Portal Research Team. Below that was another photo of something that might have been the same person, but wrong in ways that made my eyes water to look at directly. Mateo wasn't lying, I said quietly. About being CIA? No, he wasn't. About being wrongfully imprisoned? Donna shrugged. That's harder to say. The transformation process affects everyone differently. Some retain their human consciousness. Others, she gestured at the photos. Others become something else entirely. I picked up another file, this one labeled Containment Personnel, Termination Records. The first page listed names and dates going back decades, each one marked either KIA, Entity Contact, or MIA, presumed converted. How many guards have died here? 237, officially. But that doesn't count the ones who were transferred to psychiatric facilities or simply disappeared from government records entirely. Donna's voice was matter-of-fact, like she was reading inventory numbers. The survival rate for new guards is about 60% past the first year. The room felt colder. I thought about Duke's scarred face, Finn's careful warnings, the specialized response teams who moved like they'd done this hundreds of times before. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know what you're really protecting. Donna stood up and gathered several of the photographed documents. The public deserves to know what their government does in the name of national security. You're planning to expose this. I've been planning it for 2 years. She packed the camera and files into a canvas bag. I have contacts at 3 major newspapers and a documentary filmmaker who specializes in government cover-ups. Once this information goes public, there will be congressional hearings, independent investigations, maybe even criminal prosecutions for the people who've maintained this system. My hands were shaking. Donna, you can't. If people find out about this place, about what's contained here, they'll demand accountability. They'll want oversight and transparency instead of secret facilities where people disappear without explanation. Her voice carried the conviction of someone who'd thought this through completely. Democracy can't function when the government hides this level of activity from its citizens. And what happens to the entities? What happens when the public finds out there are interdimensional monsters being held in the Nevada desert? Donna paused, her bag half-zipped. That's not my problem to solve. Before I could respond, the overhead lights flickered and died. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. And in that red glow, I saw Finn standing in the doorway. Ms. Kennedy? His voice was calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. I think we need to have a conversation. Donna didn't run or try to hide the bag. She just stood there with her chin up, meeting Finn's eyes directly. I suppose we do. Both of you, upstairs, conference room. Finn stepped aside to let us pass. Now. The walk through the facility felt like a death march. Red emergency lighting made everything look wrong, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. I kept expecting alarms to start blaring, but the only sound was our footsteps on the concrete floor. The conference room was a sterile space with a long table and no windows. Finn closed the door behind us and activated what looked like a signal jamming device from a wall panel. How long? He asked Donna. 2 years, 3 months. She set her bag on the table without being asked. Since the incident with the shapeshifter in Corridor D that killed 3 guards. And your plan? Full disclosure. Everything from the original experiments to current containment procedures. Donna's voice was steady. The American people have a right to know what their tax dollars fund. Finn was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear the facility's air circulation system cycling in the background. Finally, he walked to another wall panel and activated a large monitor. Before you make any irreversible decisions, I want both of you to see something. The monitor showed security footage from what looked like a containment breach. The timestamp read 1987, and the location was listed as Site 12, Colorado. I watched guards in older-style uniforms trying to contain something that moved too fast for the camera to track clearly. Bodies hit walls with sickening impacts. Gunfire seemed to have no effect on whatever they were fighting. Site 12 was our predecessor facility. Smaller scale, fewer containment protocols. Finn's voice was clinical. In 1987, information about its existence was leaked to a reporter investigating government black sites. The footage switched to news coverage. I recognized the reporter from old network broadcasts, standing in front of what looked like a concrete bunker in the mountains. Within 6 hours of the first news report, every entity in Site 12 had escaped. Finn paused the footage on an image of the reporter holding a microphone, looking confident and determined. They were drawn to the media attention like moths to flame. The next footage was from helicopter cameras. Emergency response vehicles surrounded the facility, but they weren't responding to a containment breach anymore. They were trying to evacuate civilians from towns as far as 50 miles away. 17 entities, each one drawn to population centers by the news coverage. Finn advanced through frames showing military convoys, evacuation routes, and what looked like entire towns being abandoned. The government had to classify the entire incident as a chemical spill and relocate 14,000 people permanently. "How many casualties?" I asked. 233 confirmed deaths. Approximately 400 people simply vanished without explanation. Finn turned off the monitor. "And that was from a facility containing less than half the entities we house here." Donna's face had gone pale. The government covered it up. The government prevented a much larger catastrophe. Finn returned to his seat. "Ms. Kennedy, what do you think would happen if major news networks started broadcasting stories about this facility? If documentary crews showed up wanting to investigate our operation?" I could see Donna's conviction wavering as she processed the implications. Every entity we contain would be drawn to the attention. They feed on human consciousness, human fear, human curiosity. Finn's green eyes were intense. Full disclosure wouldn't lead to congressional oversight. It would lead to a nationwide catastrophe that would make Colorado look like a minor incident. The room was silent except for the humming of the jamming device. I looked at Donna, seeing her struggle with the weight of information she'd never considered. "Then the system is perfect?" she asked finally. "No accountability, no oversight, just blind trust that people like you are making the right decisions?" "The system is functional," Finn replied. "Not perfect, not ethical, but functional enough to prevent the complete breakdown of civilization." "What happens to Donna?" I asked. "That depends on what she chooses to do with the information she's gathered." Finn looked at the bag on the table. "And what you choose to do about her choice." I stared at the canvas bag containing 2 years of evidence, enough documentation to expose everything. Donna had been my mentor, the person who taught me how to survive in this place. But she was also about to unleash something that could destroy countless innocent lives. "Show me," I said. "Drew," Donna started. "Show me the entity's true forms. Show me what would happen if they got loose." Finn hesitated, then activated the monitor again. This time, the footage was from our own facility, shot with equipment that revealed things normal cameras couldn't capture. I saw what was really in Cell 15, not a prisoner, but something that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, reaching through space in ways that hurt to comprehend. Cell 7 contained the mimic, but in its true form, it was a writhing mass of copied memories and stolen identities. And Cell 23. Mateo looked human on the surface, but underneath I could see something else wearing his face like a mask. Something that fed on classified information and grew stronger with every secret it consumed. "They're not people anymore," I whispered. "Some never were." Finn paused the footage. "Others were once. But the transformation is irreversible, and the things they become are fundamentally incompatible with human civilization." I looked at Donna, seeing my own realization reflected in her face. The entities weren't wrongfully imprisoned. They were quarantined. The bag, I said quietly. Donna met my eyes, and I saw her understanding what I was asking. She pushed the canvas bag across the table toward me. Inside were hundreds of photographs, copies of classified documents, evidence that could expose the facility's existence to the world. Evidence that would draw every contained entity toward population centers like a magnet draws iron filings. I picked up the bag and walked to a metal trash can in the corner of the room. The documents felt heavier than they should have, weighted with the lives that would be lost if this information became public. "Drew," Donna said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry." I emptied the bag into the trash can. "I'm really sorry." Finn produced a lighter and handed it to me without a word. The papers caught fire quickly, decades of evidence turning to ash in a matter of minutes. I watched 2 years of Donna's work disappear, knowing I was destroying proof of injustices that might never be addressed. When the last document had burned, Donna stood up slowly. "I want to transfer," she said to Finn. "Where?" "Anywhere but here. I can't work alongside someone who'd choose complicity over justice." "Done." Finn's voice was gentle. "Your service record will reflect an exemplary career and a voluntary transfer for personal reasons." Donna looked at me one last time. "I hope you can live with this choice, Drew." "I hope I can too." She left without another word. I heard her footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded into the facility's ambient noise. "You did the right thing," Finn said quietly. Did I? I stared at the ashes in the trash can. Or did I just become part of the cover-up? Both. Finn deactivated the jamming device and headed for the door. That's what this job requires, Drew. The ability to live with moral complexity. I stayed in the conference room for another 20 minutes, staring at the burned evidence and thinking about the choice I'd made. I'd destroyed proof of government cover-ups, human rights violations, and institutional corruption. I'd chosen ignorance over transparency, secrecy over accountability. And I'd do it again, because some truths were too dangerous to tell. Some secrets protected more lives than they destroyed. And sometimes the most moral choice was to accept an immoral system, rather than unleash something infinitely worse. When I finally left the conference room, I walked past Donna's empty office and felt the weight of what I'd become. Not just a guard following protocols, but a willing participant in humanity's necessary ignorance. A keeper of secrets too dangerous to share. The facility felt different now, not like a prison, but like a fortress. And I was no longer just following rules to stay alive. I was protecting a world that would never know how close it had come to learning truths that could destroy it.